Well, a very good day, everybody. My name is Callum. I am from DX Commander, and RSGB have asked me to give a presentation to the convention. And I think the topic was kind of left up to me, as long as it was something to do with antennas. I've called this an obsession with antennas because in a modern world, we buy radios, right? Now, 50, 80 years ago, people were making radios, either from kits or, old televisions or something. Or did they have TVs then? I can't remember. They'd make them from kits, from old junk, all sorts of stuff. And people are still doing that. There is a market for the home brewer on the radio front. But I'm an appliance operator, like most of us are these days. Therefore, the one thing we really can change about our lives and about how we operate and about how efficient we are and how well we can hear, how well we can transmit and so on and so forth is the antenna. And I don't know about you, but I go around B&Q, or if you're in America, Home Depot, and I'll see a painter's pole or something. I'm the first person. Wendy's going, what are you doing now? I'm going, oh, wait a minute, this could be a good support for a portable doublet, An obsession with antennas. So I think what we should do is just lay down a couple of axioms. First thing I want to talk about is decibels. Now, it's got a good history, dBs, okay? It started off with Bell Telephone, Bell Laboratories, I don't know, Bell, okay? And they noticed when they polled their customers that a customer could definitely tell when the volume had dropped enough to go, oh, the volume's gone down. They called that 1 bell, okay? It was all to do with a standard cable mile or a cable mile standard or something. Very old school stuff. But as they improved their measuring techniques, they discovered that it wasn't enough granulation in the bell. So they called it a decibel, tenths of bells. Hey. Now, dB is quite interesting. You can't... under normal circumstances, you can't put an antenna up and they use dBs for optical glass, radar, all sorts of stuff where we use the term dB. You can't have, oh, I switched on my gadget today and it was 4 dB. It's got to be 4 dB better than something. Right? It's relative to something else. We often use dBi, dBd, dBV, dBw, and I'm just very briefly going to explain what that is because I'm going to be talking about dBs and I just want all of us on the same page. So let's talk about something called an isotropic radiator. Now, an isotropic radiator is an imaginary antenna which is infinitely small, okay? And it radiates in all directions. So it's a sphere. It's a sphere of RF. Radiates everywhere. It's imaginary because we can't make one of those. What we normally make is, let's say, a dipole. Now, a dipole isn't an infinite. What it is, a dipole, let's put a vertical dipole down here. A dipole will radiate more that way and that way in free space. And there's a difference between dBi and dBd at this point. It's just over 2 dB. Right. So if we've got an antenna, any antenna, we'll use purple, and it's got a gain of, let's say 3 dBi. That means the difference between this bit, the edge of the dBi, and there, the difference is 3 small b, small d, big B, right? 3. Now, what does 3 dB actually mean? Well, every 3 dB is doubling our power, or our reception, or our antenna gain, or our optical clearness, whatever they use in that industry. Every 3 dB. So you can add dBs together. So, for instance, if something is 6 dB better than something else, then we can quickly work out, well, 3 dB is doubling and 3 dB is doubling again. So if we had an amplifier that had a gain of 6 dB, all we need to do in our mind is going, well, if I'm doing 100 watts and this is a 6 dB gain, that's like going from 100 to 200 and from 200 to 400. So there's our 6 dB. And by the way, it's not linear. So 10 dB is actually tenfold, all right? So our 100 watt radio with a 10 dB gain amplifier is giving us the equivalent of 1,000 watts out the other end. So 10 dBs is a factor of 10. And you think, oh, there's not much difference between 10 and 13, for instance, but it's another 3 dB. And remember, 3 dB is doubling. So our 100 watt radio, which has got a 10 dB amplifier, would be doing 1,000 watts, but a 13 dB amplifier would be doing 2,000 watts. So that's dBs. We get to some interesting things when, when I was a young foundation student, I had a real complicated idea about dBs, and a lot of it I just used to guess. So, for instance, the RSGB band plan, or the Ofcom band plan, for instance, we're allowed, I don't know what it is, I think it's 16 dBW. I think 16 dBW. What does that on top band? So on top band, for instance, we're allowed 16 dBW. I don't know if it is, by the way. Someone will have to look it up. But let's just pretend it's 16 dBW. How do people know it's 30-something watts, right? Well, we can do... Let me turn the paper over. We can do it quite easy. If it was 16 dBW, what does 16 dBW mean? Well, 1 W is 1 watt. So it's 16. Well, this is easy because 10, we know, is going to be 10 watts. 13 is going to be, double it again, 20 watts. And 16 is going to be doubling it again, so it's 40 watts. So it must be 15 dBW, I think, because I think it's 36. But anyway, by using a mismatch of threes, you can normally calculate in your mind exactly where someone's going with dBs. And that's really important in a minute. Okay. Next thing I want to cover before we head on to our obsession with antennas is the fun we have with takeoff angles. So let's go back to the planet Earth here. And we have an antenna sticking up off the ground. We kind of know if you're watching this video, you're at the RSGB convention, or you're on YouTube or whatever, and you're watching this, you'll know some of these concepts anyway. But clearly, if I'm here and I want to talk to another station there, it's pointless me sending my signal straight up in the air, in the main, right? There can be an advantage to that on very low bands where we want to go up, refract and come straight back down. And that's called NVIS. That stands for Near Vertical Incidence Skywave Propagation, where the signal goes straight up and straight down. I'm not talking about that right now. What I'm talking about is low angle radiation. So in other words, it's called takeoff angle. We want our signal in the main to leave our station at a fairly low angle. Now, there's been some great experiments done on this, and using all sorts of arrays of antennas and computers and switches and everything, listening to very long haul DX, long distance radio, and what angle they were receiving it at. And it's anywhere between up down to 2 degrees off the horizon. This is the long haul stuff, up to about 8, maybe 9 for long haul DX. On 80 meters, sometimes it can be a bit higher, apparently. Now, I'm an antenna manufacturer, and I'm supposed to know some basic things. And for years, I must have built about 1,000 different models, and certainly up to 100 different antennas, and tested them all out in the back garden here. And what I discovered is it's hard to get low-angle transmit. It just is, okay? So we want to make an antenna and measure it at, let's say, 10 degrees off the horizon, It's actually a lot easier, and you can convince yourself your antenna's quite a lot better at 10 degrees than it is at 5. As long as you measure everything at 5 degrees of horizon, you'll know that normally, under normal circumstances, unless it's a VHF or very tall tower, right, but there are some exceptions to everything, in the main, 5 degrees will give you a good baseline if an antenna is going to perform for DX, long haul stuff. 5 degrees. I'm doing that now because we're going to get in to do a little bit of 5 degrees on here. I think it's worthwhile just covering what antennas are made of. I'm not going to do this business of how does an antenna work. I remember seeing a 1970s documentary, and they had the cameraman and the producer trying to convince this professor, right, about when they're about to go live and about to interview him, the question is going to be, how does an antenna work? And there's this professor going, why would anybody want to know that? Well, it turns out that he could explain it, but it would take him well over an hour, and nobody in their right mind would ever understand it. So I call it the magic of radio. And I remember on one of my videos once, somebody actually left a comment, probably one of these professors. It doesn't help anybody if you call it magic. Well, obviously, it's not really magic, right? But if we're going to make an antenna, we need to make it out of a conductive material. Now, we know what resistance is. Resistance is measured in ohms, okay? So if something has a resistance, we use resistors in circuits and all sorts of things. Conductivity is also a parameter we can measure, normally in Siemens per meter, all right? So, for instance, copper has a pretty good conductivity, and there's a good chart on the internet, which I'll just fire up now. So here it is. Silver has got a very good electrical conductivity of 10 to the 6 Siemens per meter. Copper is 58.7, gold 44, aluminium 36.9, and so on and so forth. It's important to know, because if we want to make an antenna out of iron, let's say, it has fairly low resistance. It does conduct electricity. So does my finger, by the way, but it doesn't make a very good antenna. So bearing in mind that you've got the precious metals like silver and gold, they're very, very expensive. I don't know anybody in their right mind that would make a 80-meter Yagi out of gold. Silver, of course, would be the best. So copper is a good, it's one down from silver, basically. Aluminium's not too bad either. So to conclude on the conductivity side, we're never going to use silver or gold for our antennas. Copper is cheap enough to be able to use, and so is aluminium. And they're not too far apart on the conductivity states. That conductivity, by the way, is going to come in a minute when we look at seawater. Okay. So as a young foundation student, I used to love the idea of modelling antennas. And I taught myself everything, by the way, but I learned how to drive one particular software modelling program that I could draw antennas in and then start to see the result. It's got to the point now I can look at an antenna and I think, well, I know what that's going to do. In the main, assuming it's tuned correctly and that sort of thing. Before we go down there, I've got a little analogy for you that you may like. And if you're ever doing a presentation at a club night or whatever, or you're trying to explain what an antenna is to someone who has no idea what amateur radio or RF is, that you might like this analogy. And I accidentally bumped into this analogy when I was trying to explain how my antenna worked to my accountant. And I said, well, the shortwave spectrum, in fact, the whole RF spectrum, is a little bit like a piano. So the long straight strings play the low notes, and the short strings play the high notes. Well, just like RF, the long wires do the low frequencies, and the short wires do the high frequencies. And we can use that analogy, and we can head in now to MMANA. And I'll show you how to get to that on the screen. Just do a Google search for MMANA-GAL. Follow this link, and fairly near the bottom, you'll be able to download this completely free. So when you fire it up, it looks something like this. We have basically 4 tabs across here. So I can quickly draw an antenna that's, let's say, 5.2 meters long, and it will automatically fill the rest in zeros. I can go and view that antenna, and there it is. Actually, I can hold the control button down, slide that one down. That is my 5.2 antenna. I can zoom in and out. That says Z there in the middle. I can zoom in and out, and I can right click here and add a feed point or a source to the beginning of the wire, which is at the bottom. So that's where our coax would go. Okay, this is a ground mounted vertical, as it so happens. I've gone back to here because it's added this here, wire 1 base. That means that's where the feed point is. You don't need to know anything else. In fact, it's defaults to 14, I think, 0.15. Let's have it a bit higher up. It doesn't really matter, to be honest. So we can view that here, and we can start to calculate. We don't add any height. It knows it's a ground-mounted vertical now. We're going to make it out of copper wire, and this is for real. So it's not a simulated free space antenna, you know, like on the moon. Well, not even on the moon, because that would start to behave a little bit like an antenna on the Earth. So we've got free space, we've got perfect and real. We don't want perfect either because we don't have a perfectly conductive surface on the ground. We can set up our ground and we'll give it 16 quarter wave radials just for a bit of fun. And let's just see what that does. It's giving us an impedance of about 38 ohms, SWR of 1.49, and it's got a gain, maximum gain is 1.12 dBi. So we can go to the far field plot now, and this is what it looks like. So on the left, we've got our plan view. That's our bumblebee flying over the top of the antenna. If it could see the RF dispersing out from the middle, it would look like this. Elevation views on the right. And we can hold our cursor and drag this around and measure things. So at 20 degrees off the horizon, it says we're 0.8 dBi. You've got to remember, this is, you need to build another antenna and measure the two, which we'll do in a minute. I just want you to remember one number in a minute. Slide down to 5 degrees off the horizon, and it says -6. -6 dBi in the middle up here. If I hit a button, you can see it says it there. That's a really important number to have because -6 sounds a bit rubbish, doesn't it? But with that -6, I've talked to people all over the world in an omnidirectional vertical. -6. Let's just remember that. I mentioned seawater earlier on, and what we can do on the ground setup just to simulate what seawater does, which has a conductivity of 5,000 millisiemens per metre. And let's start that off, and then you'll know why some of these D expeditions are so strong, because our -6 has now become 4.2. So it's effectively a 10 dB kick. We'll draw a couple of other antennas just for fun. So let's get rid of this one, and I'll quickly draw a dipole, let's say for 20 metres. Small inverted V dipole, 20 metres. Here we go. Right, there's our dipole. The feed point is at the wrong end of this one here, so I'm just going to change that to wire 1 end. Okay, so we've got X on our right-hand side, Y going north, and Z coming straight up. And we can calculate that as well, and we shouldn't be far out on the SWR. Well, we were, but it doesn't really matter. I'll quickly adjust that. It says it's at 14. Best is 14.5. Whatever, 14.5. And would be the wrong height above ground as well. This is, it's only 2 metres above the ground, it tells me here. So we probably need to add a little, we'll add a couple of metres. Say 5 metres. We'll probably get a slightly better SWR, and we do. And then we can adjust the ends and all sorts. But what I'm interested in is the far field plot, okay? I'll just check the height. So the height of this is Z2, 2 metres plus 5. Right, so we're 7 metres above the ground at the inverted V, and it goes down a couple of metres. Your average reasonable apple tree. There we are. And that's what the far field plot looks like. And what we'll do is we'll raise the height up in a minute. But before we do that, let's just measure some things. So you can see that the wire at the moment is running north-south. Therefore, like any traditional dipole, we'll be getting most of the gain off the perpendicular to the wire. Okay, so we can take our cursor and we can come down to here at 175 degrees off of the horizon. We're getting minus 8.3. We were at 6 a minute ago. So we're 2.3 dBs, slightly worse. With this one, we need to raise it up a bit. Well, let's find out what happens when we do raise this up. So this is at 7. Let's have a look at 9. There's 11. That's 13. Here's 15. Here's 17 meters now. Now let's go to a whole wavelength off the ground on the 20 meter band. So here we go. So you saw what was happening there is that as we got higher and higher off the ground, we get fingers develop. Yeah? That's, well, I don't know if that's the official term, but I call them fingers. These fingers develop, and we get these nulls going on inside here. We've got a null there of minus 10. But where our main gain is still coming out here. And if we come down to minus 5 degrees off the horizon, we're 2.9 dB. So that's nearly 10 dB better than the straight vertical by being a whole wavelength off the ground. By the way, if that's 40 meters, then we're well over 100 feet. Okay, it's the 40 meter band after all. I just think that's cool how a height above ground affects it. A couple of things actually start happening when you do lift it off the ground. As you go higher, the tune will change. Certainly up to a quarter of a wavelength. So if you're into 80 meters, a quarter of a wavelength at 80 meters is 20 meters high, so 60 feet. As you faff around with your 80 meter dipole going up and down, you'll notice that not only is the impedance changing, but so will be what the element lengths need to be. So certainly up to a quarter of a wavelength off the ground, I always think this is a seagull. Okay, if a seagull's sitting on the edge and you come along and shoo it away, it stretches its wings as it goes up. And that's what we need to do with a low band dipole. As you start to raise it up, the elements start to get longer. As it starts to get closer to the ground, I think because of capacitance with the ground, the elements can get a bit shorter. Not only that, is the SWR isn't fixed at 72 ohms. Okay, it goes past 50, then it goes over the top and comes back. And I'll find a graph to show you. Here we are, I found the graph. And you can see how it goes up and down relative to the height above ground. So a dipole is only got its 72 ohms in free space. It's not 72 ohms when it's really on the, near the ground. Okay, let's move down to the 40 meter band, and I've adjusted the same antenna for 40 meters. We've got an added height of 6 meters here, plus the 2 meters we had in stock. Do you remember? And we'll hit the start button, ignore the SWR, because the far field plot won't change, all right? Here's the far field plot. Now, what can we see here? We can see that our north-south dipole is still producing a little bit more east-west at 8 meters above the ground, all right? And bearing in mind that if that was on 80 meters, that would be 2 8s of 16. This would be 16 meters above the ground now. Now, a lot of people, they start to tell you that their dipole is, for 40 meters, running across the top of a tree somewhere, and it's north-south, and they think most of their gain is east-west. You see, it's not. Let's just run the cursor around. This is our roughly max gain. I think actually the default is 45 degrees. So at 45 degrees, which is a nice takeoff angle for the 500, 300, 400, 500 mile hop that we have on 40 meters during the day. Do you remember? Well, no, you don't remember because I haven't told you that, but we do. And I'll just round that. It says here 5.7. And if we scroll to the top, it says 2.2, 3, 4, 5. So there's only about 3 dB difference. 3 dB is equivalent of going, if you remember, from 50 watts to 100 watts. I defy anybody to honestly go, yeah, I can hear 3 dB, right? It's not enough to worry about. Just get it down. And bearing in mind, that's at 40 meters. This was on 80 metres. This is the equivalent of going from 8 metres to 16 metres high. Now, I don't know many people with a 16-metre high dipole or doublet or any shape antenna, maybe with balance line to a big fat tuner, that can deliver gain perpendicular for 80 metres. You need to go right up. And I'll just show you that now. Let's recalculate this, because I once 3.75. What's 130 feet? Let's say 33 metres plus the 2 we've got, roughly 32 metres. This is very high. I realise the tune's a little bit out of shape, resonance. It thinks it's at 3.96. Well, we could faff around with that. So at 32 metres, which is a third of a wavelength, roughly, on 80 metre band, we are getting this. And we put a dipole on top of a 100-foot tower, above the Yagis, right at the top. And we put this, and we realised that actually we need a pair. We need to switch it, because this was going to be for, I can do something here. I can force this to show me, tell me what is happening at 5 degrees off the horizon. So we were after DX in the middle of the night for 80 metres. That was going to be North America, which is delivering minus 3.7, pretty good. South America was going to be down here, minus 8.2. So there was quite a lot of difference between the two. So what we did is we put a pair of dipoles with more coax and another switch. Tell me about it. Anyway, just interested. So on 80 metres now, if you've got a 10 metre high dipole, I'm sorry if I'm labouring this point, it's a bubble of RF. That's what I call it, a bubble of RF. Honestly, it doesn't really matter what the shape is of the antenna. It's a bubble of RF in the main on 80 metres. And look, I mean, we can. This is, I think, at 45 degrees off the horizon. I think so. Which is your average. 45 degrees during the day is your average loafy around. Fine, you know, you're in Manchester talking to Fred in Brighton, about 45 degrees. Minus 5.8 there, minus 2.5 there. 3 dB in it. You'd never know. All right. Interesting. So basic software modelling is damn good fun. And it not only teaches you how it works and what's happening in terms of the energy coming off the antenna, but it allows you to start to get ahead of the curve when you're starting to plan antennas. That's all. I'll go back to the book here. I'm not trying to... I fully appreciate there's a lot of people in this convention, there's a lot of people on YouTube, and every video I make, there are professors and very clever people watching it. A lot of them trying to catch me out. I'm pretty sure of it. But I'm here to give you inspiration on the one hand. It's also a bit of fun, isn't it? Right? It's kind of it's education and, what's the other word? Entertainment. Education and entertainment. They go hand in hand. Because if it's boring as hell, you're not going to watch it anyway. Multi-banding antennas is quite good fun. So if we take a dipole, for instance, now dipole with our coax coming off the middle, and let's say these are roughly 10 metre legs, will be resonant on, let's say, 7.1 megahertz, right? Now, technically, according to the books, that's resonant 3 times the value of what we've just got. So if it's resonant on 7.1, it's actually, the next time it's resonant, it says here, according to the maths, it would be resonant on 21.33, yeah. It's not, right, because we've got the height above ground has changed as a percentage of the wavelength. It's got a lot higher now, basically. And it's now a 3/4 wave dipole, effectively, for 21 metres. So that's its next resonance. Just multiply by 3, okay? So if you could take any band, multiply it by 3, will be its next harmonic. Now, the only in the main, that's the only one we normally need to be worried about. Because if you're making a fan dipole, in other words, and just for the case you don't know, right, you've got a piece of coax that looks like that. And normally a coax has got a centre conductor, normally made of copper, and it has this braid on the outside, right? So if you don't know anything about amateur radio, just remember what the coax from your TV used to look like. right? Although people don't have that anymore either, do they? Anyway, so a dipole basically is that end goes one side of this, and that end there goes the other side of it. Effectively, that's what's happening. A fan dipole is fascinating. So what we can do is, if these are 10-metre legs, we can then do 5-metre legs off the same feed point with no other contraption, and that will automatically get the middle band, which for us is going to be 20-metre band. And 20-metre band is roughly 14 megahertz. So then you've got a dipole for that one that's going red. So this is going to do 40 and 15, and that one is going to do 20-metre band. You could add another one, either a longer one going this way for 80 metres, or maybe a little baby one in here for the 10-metre band. Fan dipole. Another way of kind of multi-banding an antenna would be to go down the loop route. So a basic loop, and I had one of these in my garden for years, and a lot of people know this because I talk about it quite a lot because I loved it, is that you use something called a 4-to-1 balun here, right? Because this has roughly got an impedance of 200 ohms. And our coax that goes to our radio is normally 50 ohms. So we need to divide that by 4 to equal 50. So we use a 4-to-1 balun, okay, which connects to this point here, and then the coax back. Now, a loop resonates on every frequency. So 7.1, 14.2, 21.3, so on and so forth. You get the 10-metre band as well, obviously, 28.4. So loops are good fun as well. You don't need to do anything fancy to multiband a loop, unless you do you want a monoband loop, but we won't cover that now, because you can feed it with a quarter wave, less the velocity factor of 75 ohm coax, and that would give you a transformer from your loop to your coax to your radio, but then it'd be monoband. It would only do the one frequency, normally the target frequency you were originally after. So loop. Then we've got the end fed, and the end fed uses a little contraption, either a 49-to-1 or a 64-to-1 transformer. Our coax comes in here, and then out the other end, this transformer here, and out the other end we've got an end fed, and an end fed is a half wave. It's resonant and the half wave, which is opposite to a dipole. Well, for each element it would be. So if we've got a 40-metre element for a half wave, it'd be quite long. It'd be 20 metres long. All right, so that would be 20-metre length. So that is 20 metres. It would also be resonant on its doubles, so you'd get that on the 20-metre band as well. The jury's out between 49 and 64. You can make either quite easy, right? Hence the two. Mike and I like the idea of a 64. Whatever. And then, of course, the last thing is that I wanted to cover today. If you can make a fan dipole, you can make a fan vertical. Hey, and this was an accident. Seriously, an accident I had, where I had a telescopic pole and I had a 40-metre wire going up it, right? 40 metres. And it was ground mounted. So the coax, centre of the coax goes up the pole, and the braid I just put on the ground, you see. Connected it, obviously, on a few radials, probably about 8 or 10. You can use more. I've covered that plenty of times on YouTube. But what I discovered, on the same feed point, I could put, let's say, a 20 up the side, and I was getting 40 and 20. And that developed until I now put 6 elements up a DX Commander. That's a fan vertical. And that works at about -5, -6 dB at 5 degrees off horizon. I just want to cover that one thing before we close this off, ladies and gentlemen, which is many years ago, a lot of people had 2 antennas. They had their main transmit antenna and a receive antenna. But then the Yagi technology came along, and people realised actually you could do it all on one antenna, all right? But, you know, I think the world has changed again. And because of all the local noise we're getting on our antennas, there is an argument to say, well, the radios are so good these days, why don't we put a dedicated antenna? It could be a loop on the ground, for instance. Just Google it, loop on the ground. Plenty of people that have done loops on the ground. And put that into your receive jack. And that way, because the thing is about a vertical, for instance, it gets out very well. And I used to make a terrible mistake of only using my antennas for receive for the testing. I go, oh, I don't like that. Right? I didn't realise that it was transmitting really well, but it was just picking up maybe more noise. Because let's think about this. A vertical antenna will pick it. It's got, well, we know it's got very low angle gain capabilities. So if you've got a house a couple of doors away generating some sort of stuff from the back of his fridge or whatever, your vertical is going to pick it up quite well, whereas your low to the ground-ish dipole isn't so much. So I challenge everybody these days to have a look at the back of your radio. Has it got a receive jack? For £10, $5, you can build a nice little receive loop. You can pin it down on the grass outside. No one will ever see it within about 3 weeks. And it will give you a lovely option on receive. And your radio is perfectly good enough without having a preamplifier. The topic of antennas obviously is enormous. We can go down Yagis, we can go down log periodics. There are books. To have a half-hour or so presentation about antennas to cover all the topics of antennas is going to... it is impossible. We'd have to play it 1,000 times the speed. If you look at ON4UN's book, Low Band DXing book, I think there's something like 18 chapters. I've skimmed the surface of everything. Antennas are fantastic. They're great fun. They're the one thing in life that makes the difference between a reasonable station and a very good station. And I encourage you all to go out there, play with receive loops, get an apple tree, throw a vertical up it for 20 metres, for instance. A few radials on the ground. Try low to the ground. I went as low as 4 feet off the ground on 40 metres before I started noticing a difference that the receive was starting to die. People could still hear me. Unless you do these experiments, you'll never know. And somebody once said to me, I don't know why you're doing this. It's already been done and it's been written in such and such a book. The thing is, I hadn't done it. And there's a couple of topics I've now challenged and changed, including, for instance, a very high sky loop in a triangle configuration has massive gain opposite the feed point. And I remember originally having arguments with this. I think I've finally won that one now, but just because it's been done before and you haven't done it doesn't mean to say you can't. So go and have fun, enjoy your radio, enjoy your antennas, and I'll see you on the next one. So from Callum here at World Headquarters in the bunker, a very good day.